All right. Well, we have a great session today, so I don't want to wait any longer to get us kicked off. But I'm Julie Nocote, and I'm Dean of Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural session for our Fall Lunch and Learn series. These events will be taking place about every other week throughout the semester. And through these sessions, we hope to do two things. One is to highlight the expertise of our faculty, not only the research that they are doing, but how the research they're doing has an effect on society and speaks to and helps us understand the most important issues in the country and in the world today. And then second, of course, we just want this to be an educational opportunity for our audience. This is your chance to interact with some of the scholars who are out there asking and answering these really important questions, and they can help you to sort through and understand these things a little bit better. We are privileged to welcome today's speaker, Gang Chen, who's an associate professor in public administration and policy. And what he will do for us today is provide a brief overview of public pension plan management, public pension funding issues, and potential reforms using New York state and local retirement systems as his example. He is a great person to talk to this topic because he has a new book just published entitled Managing Public Pension Plans, Decisions, Challenges, and Reforms. And that is out now from Routledge Press if you don't get enough of this topic in today's lecture. Before I hand the digital microphone over to Professor Chen, I just want to go over a few basic ground rules. I'll ask everybody to keep your mics on mute until the presentation is over. And then once we get into the Q&A, you can raise your hand and I will call on you, or Gang will call on you. Or if you prefer to ask an anonymous question, you can send that to me in a private chat and I will read that question aloud for you. I also did want to alert everybody that we are recording this session and we will be putting it on the Rockefeller College YouTube page for people who are not able to make it today. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Gang, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot more about this really important topic.
Thank you very much, Julie. Thank you for having me in this lunch and learn, and thank you everybody for coming to this section. I'm going to share my screen. The topic today is about understanding public pension plans. And I have been studying this topic for more than a decade because it's an important topic to each one of us and also for many governments. Because in the public sector, many of the public employees participate in these plans and get benefit from these plans when they retire. And then to the government, they also need to contribute a substantial portion of their budget every year to these plans. And that portion, the payment to pension plans has been increasing in recent years. And because of that, they have brought some fiscal stress to some governments. So I'm going to use this opportunity to share what I have learned over the years and what I think would be the path towards resolving these issues. So I want to, as Julie suggested, I want to use this activity as a way to share and also to have a discussion with the audience. So the plan today is that I will start with some very basic information about the pensions and U.S. Social Security, like what's the source of the retirement income for the U.S. people, U.S. individuals. And then I'll just briefly talk about the challenges that we face in these systems and in the path to reform. And at the end, I will use this New York State and local retirement system as a case. I only have several slides as a way to start a conversation with the audience. As I said, many of you may participate in these systems or have been involved with policy discussions with this New York State local retirement system. So we'll have some discussion on this topic. So as we know, if we look at retirement income of any countries, we say there are three pillars. You should be able to see my mouse moving here. Three pillars of retirement income. The first pillar is the universal coverage, the social security system that provide wide coverage to the workers, both in the public sector and the private sector. Different countries have different social security systems. In the US, the federal security system provides some basic income to you. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the second pillar is tied to an employer, meaning that if you work for government or you work for private sector company, you will get employer-sponsored pension. And most people, when they retire, they get a check from the Social Security, and they get a check from the employer-sponsored pension plans. In the private sector, that's something that we are all familiar with, the 401k plan, the private sector 401k plan. In the public sector, we have public sector pension plans. Public sector pension plans. These are provided by state and local government. Private sectors 401k plans are contributed both by the employee and the employer, right? And the third pillar is the personal saving and investment. Personal saving and investment. Those three are the main income for your retirement. How do we know whether you get enough retirement income or not? That's something we call replacement ratio. This is a ratio that we use to decide whether your retirement income is enough or not. The way to calculate that is by dividing your post-retirement income. After you retire, how much you get in a month, and your pre-retirement salary. Before you retire, how much you get. So if I have 100K before my retirement, I'm supposed to get certain percent of that as my post-retirement income, as my pension. Combining all these sources, all these three sources together, if we have a replacement ratio of 75 to 80%, that's kind of something that people agree upon, is that you will consider to have enough retirement income. That will be able to sustain your living standard before and after the retirement. So if we look at these three pillars, the Social Security in the US only provides 20 to 30%. Sorry, 20 to 13% of your right. Yeah, 20 to 30% of your retirement income, because that's the way US Social Security system is designed. In other countries, it might not be like that. Social Security covers 96% of the US workers. It's pay as you go, meaning that your tax and receipt for the year are going to pay the retirees benefit. And this is funded through the payroll tax. As you can see, it's progressive here in the graph on the right. For if you have a higher income, the Social Security benefit only replace a small portion of the income. But if you have a lower income, then the Social Security benefit can replace a greater portion, as you can see, a greater portion of your previous income. But with all this, on average, Social Security only give you 20 or 30% of your previous income. And as we look at employer-sponsored pension plans, as you can see, there are two types. That's defined benefit plans and defined contribution. I won't get to the detail of this, but 401k is the defined contribution plan. Public pension, most public pensions are defined benefit plans, meaning that at the end of the retirement, at the end of your employment and you get to the retirement, your retirement benefit is calculated by a formula. So it's defined, it's calculated by a formula. The DC plan, the benefits are not calculated by a formula. It depends on how much you put in the pension account and what's the investment return you receive from that pension account. And from over time, you can see that DC plans takes more portion of all the pension plans, and that's because the private sector use more DC plans. The public sector still use the DB plans. Most of public sector use DB plans, and that leads to something is called the pension liability. Because in the DC plans, the government will not have liability because whatever the employee will get, it depends on the individual pension account. But the DB plans, because those benefits are promised to the employees, so the government will have liabilities on that DB pension plans, and that's why that's continuously taking more portion of the government's benefit. They need to require to fund their pension plans every year. So, and then the third pillar is individual retirement system. That's usually what we refer to as the IRA. That's a traditional IRA and the rules IRA. For information, the third pillar is not very strong in the US. It may not be the same in other countries, but in the US, the third pillar is not very strong. So basically, if you put everything together, we have pillar 1, pillar 2, pillar 3. Pillar 1 only give you 20 to 30%. Pillar 2, you need to rely on pillar 2. The employer sponsor pension for either 401k or your public pension to get 60 to 65% to be able to get your sufficiency goal. The third pillar is the IRA that in the US is not very strong, but you may also have your own IRA. So we can talk about that if we have time. So that leads to, if you just focus on the second pillar and also look at pension for the government, then we have this something called public pension crisis. What it means, you can see a lot of these titles, and what it means is that the government has promised a large amount of pension benefits in their pension systems, which constitute their pension liability, but they don't have enough funding to support those liabilities, which lead to this pension crisis. And sometimes you heard about this on the radio or in government's budget, and that's what this is about. So you can see that because in employer-sponsored defined benefit plans is pre-funded, when the employees are working, you will already calculate how much liabilities, how many benefits they earn in a year, how much benefits you need to pay them when they retire. So they start to accumulate these liabilities. When you don't have put enough contribution aside to fund those liabilities, they will have underfunding issues. But the funding sources for these public pension plans comes from employee contribution. If you are in New York State, tier 1 to tier 6, you know that tier 5 and tier 6 need to put employee contribution. Tier 3 and tier 4, you need to contribute for a certain number of years, and after that, you don't need to contribute. But tier 5 and tier 6, there's still employee contribution. And then employer contribution, that is the amount the governments have to put in. But sometimes the governments don't fully fund their contribution because they have other things that they need to fund. In the New York State, fortunately, the employer always pay their contributions. We can talk about that later. And then investment returns. So all of this contribution will put in the stock market and some other real estate market, private equity, etc., to gain returns. And that's the returns also fund a large amount of their liability. So look at this. This is a graph that done by the Equitable. They have funded one of our research projects, and they make some nice graphs. So I just borrow that graph here. You can see the orange line here. That is the public. This is state and local pension. So just focus on state and local pension. The orange line here, that is the liability. That's a liability that they have accumulated over the years. You can see that keep going up. And that's the asset that they have accumulated in those systems. The gap is the underfunding gap. That is where the public pension crisis comes from. As you can see, previously it was fine. It was more or less enough. But during the Great Recession, that's a big job. This is the time the pension crisis start to catch people's attention, and then people worry that these pension plans will bankrupt or will not be able to keep their promise. That's the time I started to do my research. And then over time, it kind of sustained pretty well, like keep the same gap. Well, not enlarge that because, but it's not narrowing as well. Because the stock market has been doing well, but not that well to be able to close the gap. And then during the COVID time, as you remember, the COVID time actually gave us some pretty good investment returns during the first year of the COVID. So it gets narrower, but still the gap is there, going back to the previous level. And this is looked at as a percentage. So in 2025, the asset that they have in those systems are able to fund about 81% of the liabilities. So that's kind of the funding issue here. How do we close the gap, and whether the gap will keep increasing and that will consume more of government's budget. So this is the book that I just published in May. And what we want to do is that we want to explain how the decisions are made. What are the institutions for those decisions? What are the environment constraints for those decisions? And explain how these decisions lead to this performance of these pension plans. And we build what we call a logic model framework to explain this. I won't get to the detail of it. I'll just give you what we did in the book. So a logic model is there's inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And there's connection. Inputs lead to outputs, and outputs lead to outcomes. And we find that that's a good way to explain these pension decisions, because we look at it, this is not like this is not strictly defined outputs, but we kind of use this way to describe pension decisions. We have a look at it, there are four main decisions that pension system make. There are investment decisions, actuarial practices, how they measure the liabilities, how to calculate the liabilities, how they calculate the assets. There's a benefit decisions, how much benefit to give the employees, and there are contribution decisions, how much they pay to the system every year. And these outputs are influenced by these inputs. That's environment constraints, including the capital market, the government's finance, the politics. Politics plays a big part here. And then there are stakeholders who would like to influence these decisions. There are pension plan administrators, there are advisors, actuaries, professionals, and there are trustees, and there are also the employers, the government that participates in these systems. And there are also constraints, there are rules, laws, contracts, union contracts. So all of these will influence the decision that they make. And then the decisions influence the outcomes, the performance of these systems. Funding is one of those goals. But we say besides funding, there's also other goals, such as whether the pension benefits are sufficient enough. Because as we know, government pensions are probably more generous than the private pensions, and that's one of the things that people kind of assume. And if government job lose that pension sufficiency, that may also influence the government workforce. I'm working on a paper that look at that to change of pension on the employee, on the workforce, and on the employees' decisions. And then affordability is that whether the government can afford it, whether the government can afford it. If you look at the local governments, they are local governments in New York or in the States. They are having difficulty keeping up with their required pension contributions every year, because that's something that's always in there, and that could that increase in many years. Sustainability, I refer to the pension funding, whether they have enough funding to pay their liability. And the efficiency, I refer to the investment efficiency, whether they will be able to generate enough investment returns. And then there's also good governance practice, including whether they have transparency in their decisions, whether they have people serving on the board who are making responsible decisions, because a lot of decisions are made by trustees serving on the pension board, and sometimes we found that there's different governance practices that may lead to different decision or bias in those decisions. So that's the outcomes that we look at the goals. So we define those outcomes and goals in the book, and also we develop some goals to target for those goals. For example, sufficiency benefit defined as the replacement ratio greater than 75 to 80%, and then funding ratio should be greater than 80%. And those this is how we define those goals. This can serve as a kind of a guideline for governments for scholars to look at whether they will be able to meet these goals. And we also say that balancing these goals is important, because sometimes if a pension reform targets certain goals, want to improve the affordability of pension costs, but that may come at the cost of other goals, and that usually it's difficult to do because each of the goals have their stakeholders, as we see in the previous slide. There are these stakeholders, and those stakeholders, the goals are different for different stakeholders. And you see, if you look at the replacement rate, this is FYI here, the New York State replacement rate for long-term employees is greater than 80%. And then for short-term employee, the New York State replacement rate not that good. This is based on Urban Institute calculation. It's an old calculation, but nobody is doing an update calculation on the replacement rate. If I'm lucky, I should be able. I will be able to get a project, a funded project to do this calculation, because this is going to be a big project to calculate the replacement rate for the 6 with the newer data. But I need funding to do this, so that's to be done. So this is something that we've done in the book. You can see this is our calculation. You can see this is the investment returns. This is the asset classes, equity, fixed income, alternatives, and cash, and others. I'll just briefly talk about this. As you can see, in the previous years, most of the investment, this is about 50 or 60% of the investment goes to the stock market. And that has come down over the years to about 45%. The reason is because these systems want higher returns, but the stock market does not give them enough in those returns. So what we see in the study is that the systems gradually increase this dashed line here. What is this? This is the alternative investments. They keep increasing the investment in alternative investments with the goal of getting more investment returns. I did an interview with the media on this, and they asked me why the reasons for this. And I have my explanation, but this is something that we observe. And within this alternative investment, what are those alternative investments? As you can see, this is the breakdown of the alternative investment of this solid line of the dashed line here. As you can see, it breaks that down to 5 categories. All of them are going up. The one that goes up the most is the private equity. So private equity goes from 4% to 12% or 13% in this pension plans. Whether that is a good sign or a bad sign, I don't know. But this is worth discussion and further investigation. The discount rate has gone down from 8% to 7%. I won't get into detail of this, but this is another project that we did for the Gatsby. This is something that's important. So the normal cost, which is the cost to maintain those systems, as you can see, this is state, county, city, and school. The black circle and the gray triangle here, gray diamond here, shows that is the county and city plans. County and city plans are more costly than state plans. stay in state and school plans. And within this, if we look at that by employee types, the public safety has the highest cost. That's the police and fire. Police and fire have the have the highest cost than the general employee and the teachers plan. This is concerning as well. As you can see, that's a required contribution as a percent of payroll. So say like, if I pay certain amount to employee's salary, payroll, right? Payroll. This is how much it would cost me to fund that pension. And we have double checked these numbers. They are right, but it's pretty a big portion. You can see the payroll. This is the percent payroll for the counties and cities. It goes from 10% in 2020 to about 30% in 2022, and that's a big portion. About 30% of the payroll goes to their pension cost. That's a big portion. For the state and school, it's a little bit better, but it still goes up from 10% to 20%. And if you convert that to the percent of the government budget, that is also a big portion of the government budget, because as you know, for state, for county and cities, for any government, a big portion of their budget goes to payroll. This is the required and actual contribution. The dark one is the required. What are they required to pay? But you can see over the years that it's always a little bit lower on average. It's also always a little bit lower than the required. And there are reasons for this, but that over time will contribute to this pension funding gap. Pension funding gap is caused by not fully pay the required contribution, and also the investment return is not as ideal as they expect. So that shows over time here. So the refund options. Either they need to change their pension benefits, but it's very difficult to change that because public sector pension benefits are protected by law and protected by union contract. You either need to renegotiate the contract and also need to go through the legislature, and it's always not very welcome to cut pension for public employees, as you can imagine. They can create new tiers, which is what they did in New York State, create new tiers. And that's what they did in many other systems. It's relatively easier to do that because you are making benefit decisions for future people that are not here yet. So sometimes it's easier for them to make stress a new tier with lower benefits. That's a way to cut benefit. But guess what? Those people, it's create equity issue here. Like if you are here 1 year after I joined the system and suddenly your pension benefit is a lot lower than mine. So that's one equity issue. Another is that over time, you can see these new tiers. And we see that in many other states as well, in New York State as well. Maybe after these new employees comes in the system, and they will also seek to increase their benefits. And that happens in many places. So what's that? And there's another way is to change the contribution, increase the contribution, either to ask the employee to pay more, which is another way to also to lower their take-home income, or the government have to pay more. But as you know, that now many governments have difficulty increasing their contribution to these pension system because their budgets are very strict, so it's difficult for them to increase. So that's challenge there. Or you can change their retirement eligibility rules, increase the years of service, increase the retirement age, etc. But that also goes to like the benefit decisions. This is the benefit eligibility. So you also get challenges or similar issues that you face if you want to change the benefit eligibility. That's also a way to introduce new plan designs, and this gets popular. In recent years. I will talk a little bit about that. And change the investment practices. Hope that investment return can increase. this is what we see with like the investment composition changes, but we also don't know what the investment return will be like in the future. We don't know whether the investment practices, new investment practices will bring in more income, investment returns. It's difficult to say that. And then there's also like reform on the board composition of the governance, but we also don't know whether that can lead to some positive outcomes. Some governments also issue bond to explicitly fuel their liabilities, but then these POBs, these bonds also need to pay back. So whether that's good or not, we also don't know. But there's a lot of controversies over the POBs. Personally, I also have very big reservation about POBs. So this is something that there's alternative pension plan design. This is many governments are doing, and I have done several projects on this. And I think that this could be one of the options, which is the idea that now in the DB plan, as you can see, employers bear a lot of risk and liability. But in the private sector, the DC plans, the employee bear the risk. And there's somewhere in between. There's some risk sharing plans. Somewhere in between. There are different plan designs that can have the features of DB and DC. And many governments would like to transition from DB to DC, but that's a huge resistance of doing that. Because DC plans, usually people perceive that DC plans, if you don't manage well, you have lower benefits. But maybe there's some way between. Means that you can tie some of these benefits to investment returns. If the investment return is good, then the risk is the returns are shared. But if the investment returns are not that good, or the funding ratio is not that good, then maybe some of this risk or the cost should be shared between the employee and employer. Meaning that if we're doing well, then you will keep your benefit. But if the investment or the funding are not doing so well, then the employee will also need to increase their contributions or reduce some of the benefits. And that's a way of risk sharing. That's kind of a compromise. So we have several takeaways at the end of the book saying that I want to point out several things, which is engaging the stakeholders. As I point out, there are several stakeholders, and the more you engage them in the discussion, the more likely that you will have a reform. Balance multiple goals, and some will also talk about need to take actions now, because the more you kick the can down the road, the more difficult it is to take actions. Consider some consequences, long-term and short-term consequences, as you make pension decisions. There are several ways that you can do some calculation of some possible consequences, long-term risks in the future, and manage the risk and uncertainty, etc. So we have wrote about that in the last chapter of the book. So let's just briefly look at New York State. How are we doing comparing to other states in terms of funding? The New York State system have three. That's New York State TIS, which most SUNY employee participates in TIS, New York State teachers, and also most all of the New York, the local government school districts also participates in TIS. And then there's New York State and local EIS. This is general employees. So as you can imagine, this is also big. All of the local government in New York State, except New York City, participate in this huge system. And then there's a state and local police and fire. That's all the police and fire officers, except New York City, participate in this system. And these three plans are coming together is the NYS, LIS, New York State and Local Retirement System. And though these are the three lines represent these three systems, and the orange one or the red one, this is the all state plans average. So all state plans is here as what I showed at the beginning of the presentation, and we are doing a lot better than other states. So we don't have that funding issue, except probably police and fire is a little bit lower than the other two. But TIS is doing pretty well, near 100%. But we can also see that it has decreased over time a little bit, right? But in terms of funding sustainability, there's no major concern here. In terms of investment return, we're not doing better or worse than national average, because you can't do too much about investment returns, and that's just because you rely on the stock market. There's some not so much overlap here, and that's just because of the New York State fiscal year is a little bit different than the other states. So that's not a lot to talk about here. This is something that was talking about, which is the requirement, how much you need to pay as a percent of the payroll. As you can see, first of all, this orange line here, this orange or red line here, that is the state average. You can see it goes up, but it's more smooth. It's more smooth. New York State goes up and down so much, and this is sometimes people, New York State people call it a retirement contribution roller coaster because it goes up and down every year. It makes it difficult to manage your budget. Another thing is that the New York State police and fire is pretty high. It's pretty high, and in some years, it gets pretty high, and that's right after the Great Recession. So that is something that it makes it difficult for the state or local governments to keep up with this required pension contribution. And here's the 6 tiers that we have in New York State. You can see tier 1 to tier 6. Tier 1 is 73 and 76 and 83. Most of the people I know, they are either in tier 5 or tier 6. Tier 6 is the time I joined the 6th term, and I know pensions. So I didn't join this 6th term because I think my calculation is not that good for me. So I joined a DC plan, which is optional. I opt out from the 6th term. But now tier 6 is becoming better than the time I joined. And then there's also that the benefit rules for this tier 1 to tier 6 is very complex. I won't get to the detail of it. So that's all I have to present. And I'd like to use this opportunity to kind of have a discussion with the audience. I'm going to stop my sharing and then I turn over to Julie.
Wow. I feel like I understand all this so much better than I did just a little while ago. So thank you so much. I know people are kind of absorbing and collecting their thoughts about what you've just presented. So while people are figuring out what questions they have to ask you, we do have a few that came in advance of your talk. So I'm going to start with those. But once again, if you do have a question, you can either send it to me or you can raise your hand and ask it directly. But as we're waiting, one of our responders asks, public employee unions and advocates have argued that tier 6 is less generous than previous tiers and acts as a barrier to recruitment and retention of public workers. How do we attract job seekers to join the state workforce with tier 6 and with the possibility that at some point in the future, there will be a less generous tier 7?
It's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult. So yes, tier 6, if you look at that, if you look at the rules change, I have a slide that shows the tier 1 to tier 6 different tiers. And I don't use that table anymore because the numbers are not most updated anymore. But if you look at that table, you can already see that tier 6 is much less generous than tier 5. And that's because of this need to reduce the benefits. After that tier 6 was introduced after the Great Recession. And that's just because after the Great Recession, they see that that's a huge increase in pension cost that they cannot sustain it. So they have to reduce it. The way to reduce it is by creating a new tier. So that's a logic there. But on the other side, as you mentioned, and the question referred to, that will create some barrier to recruitment and for retention. We still need more evidence in that. I'm doing research on that. We don't know how much empirical evidence we have on the impact of pension benefits, impact on the new employees, especially new employees, because that is probably far in the future, and how much people are aware of that, whether they will consider that when they take the job. But research shows that salary is more important than pension, of course, and how much the newer generation value the pension, the defined pension, benefit pension that they will collect many years from their hire. We don't know, but that is the legitimate concern. That's a legitimate concern. We don't know, but we don't know. Unions always say that, of course. Union advocate always say that, but we don't know. But that's a legitimate concern, and that's also at least that benefit sufficiency as the first goal of all these 5 goals. That's one of those goals that need to balance. You cannot have a pension reform that just target affordability or funding issues. Otherwise, you will fail, and this is what we see here. That's here. So my suggestion is several things. Number one, we need to have more information to understand how these benefits will develop in the field, because all this can be calculated. How much you promised employees today, and then as they work, as they accumulate their benefits, how much you need to pay them. So have some simulation. That's what we're doing for many systems. Have some simulation to see the cost of these systems. When we know more information about the cost, about the severity of the underfunding, then that's the time to have the discussion involves multiple stakeholders, the unions, the employees, multiple stakeholders can be on board and have some discussion, at the end, this pension reform will be a compromise of different people's priorities of what they advocate for. And it will be an informed discussion because you need to know the cost of these pension benefits. I think what's happening now is that we're making many of these decisions without full information about what this will cost us in the future. And if they understand that if we keep promising more benefits, at a point you will not be able to afford it, or at a point you will face some severe cuts or tax increases, then this discussion will be different. So
that's a really helpful response. And this question, I think, is kind of related. I would guess that everybody in this Zoom would say that if there's going to be pension reform, we want you to be in charge of it. So that you can navigate all of this complexity and help come up with a just solution that's going to work. But of course, that's not the way that politics generally works in New York State or anywhere else. So what do you think? Do you think that there are any plans in New York State or at the local level to transition away from pensions? And how difficult do you think reform is going to be if it has to come?
So it's difficult. Transition away. I'm not sure. I need to look into that because for currently we have this huge pension system, and don't get me wrong, this system is still doing very well. The system if you can see, doing a lot better than other states and other local. I'm currently living in Massachusetts, and the Massachusetts local pension here, they have a huge problem, more problem than New York State. As I can look at the data and see. So the system is doing well financially. I don't know if a local government, if they start their own plans, whether they will do better, whether there's a better option than being part of the New York State plan. So that's that. And another thing is to transition away from DB to DC plan, which is basically 401k, which is like in SUNY we have this option of called optional retirement plan, which is you are not part of the pension, state pension, but you contribute certain percent, and the SUNY contributes certain percent and put together as a DC plan, and then you pick your own investment. So that's kind of optional DC plan, like individuals pick the DC plan versus the DB plan. That might be a way so you can capture some people who have more interest in controlling their pension and not be part of this big pension system. So that might be an option. But that doesn't solve this problem of waste. That doesn't help to pay the pension benefits or liabilities that we have already promised in this big pension system.
Yeah.
That's my personal opinion.
So I have another question. This is kind of maybe a generational politics or generational
Sure.
justice question. So while investment returns are moving up and down,
Yeah.
This person asks, since 1999, the retirement fund's compound average rate of return has been 7% a year. The fund's long-term expected rate of return is 5.9%. In contrast, the cost of living adjustments have averaged just 1.4%. And over the past 3 years alone, the consumer price index has risen by nearly 10% more than pension benefits. Why do you think this situation persists, and what should be done?
It's a very difficult question, and I have looked into this. I have looked into this, but I don't have good answers. So what this question about is is that the pension benefits are due in the future, and we don't need to have, like, if need to pay $100 of pension benefits probably 30 years from now, I don't need to have $100 now. I only need a portion because this is will be investing in the stock market, and they will grow to $100 3 years from now. So say like I only need $17 and assume that this $17 will grow to $100. In the 90s, the stock market is performing pretty well. And on average, many system can justify an 8%, or 7.5% discount rate. It means that I only need $17 because based on this 8% increase, it will go to 100 years from now. But the Great Recession changed a lot. And even after the Great Recession, the investment comes back, but this is not the 90s anymore. And that might be another recession coming. We have been keep talking about this many years. And even there's no Great Recession, people also worry about this low income environment. It's something that I also have a paper about, a low retirement, meaning that there's no big job in the stock market, but it has been consistently low every year. In 2017, I presented a paper about this at a workshop in Harvard. So, which means that this discount rate, this assumption that $17 will grow to $100 need to change. So we have seen that many systems have gradually reduced this discount rate from 8% to 7.5% to 7%. And now I saw on one of the slides, it's about that's the recent study we did for Gatsby. It's about on average about 7%. But many people argue that this is still not enough. Maybe you need to go to 5%. And if you go to 5%, it will be a big change. It will be a big change. There will be a huge increase in the liabilities. The discount rate, that's every year. If discount $100 to today, using 7% as the discount rate or 5% as the discount rate, that makes a big difference. And if the discount rate have changed, the liability will go up and the retiree contribution will go up, and that will have a huge impact on government's budget. So no right solution here. I think that the pension systems are doing now is, my guessing and from the data that I saw is that they try to manage their investment rate better. They try to have more like change of increase more alternative investments to justify that they can still make 7%. In the 90s, just stock market will be able to help you justify that. But now stock market are not able to. So they're using some other ways to justify this 7%. Whether these several other ways can help them to make 7%, we don't know. And nobody knows in the future. So that is the big challenge. Another is this cost of living adjustment. Cost of living adjustment is like when you retire, you get probably $100 as just say $100 as your retirement benefit, but you still have like 20 years of retirement time or 30 years of retirement time. If just to get $100 a year, that would be worth nothing at the end of retirement. So many systems have this cost of living adjustment. Every year, this will go up by 2% or certain percent. This is called cost of living adjustment. It's just a way to increase your benefit over time by 2%. The maximum that we see is about 2 or 3%. The maximum that we see is about 2 or 3%. And when you have an inflation rate that is 6 or 7%, it makes it so difficult. Several years ago, a person approached me and said, "Let's do a project on the increase of the inflation rate. What would that affect government pensions?" And my reaction was, "What are you talking about? Like, how can the inflation rate increase to 7 or 8 or 9%? That's not possible." And then I really glad that I didn't do that project because it's just out of our expectation. How do you have a pension that only goes up 1 or 2% a year, and with the inflation rate that is 7 or 8%? So no solution to that, because you just cannot keep increasing the pension. That's just not enough. That's not enough. But whether it's complicated because we don't know whether the inflation, the assumption is that the inflation will come down. If this sustained, it will be also a problem. So we don't know. We don't know whether the inflation will sustain or it will come down and go back to the previous level of 2 or 3%. So again, no good answer.
Yeah, these problems really are thorny. We do have a couple minutes for a question or two, if there are any. So again, please indicate if you have a question. Give people just a minute to think there.
If any of you are in Tier 6, I'd like to hear your thoughts as well. I know that there is some current discussion on Tier 6. In SUNY, you are allowed to join. I think it's either EIS or TIS or have this DC plan. When you join the system, then they give you the option. If you are in a Tier 4, which was before 2010, they have very good benefits.
Well, again, definitely a lot to think about, and very, very complex with no easy answers. And I know some of us are in these different tiers, and some of us may be parents looking at the younger generation entering the workforce and trying to grapple with these issues.
Yeah.
So quite a lot there.
Yes. So yeah. So my work now, because that's really no clear answer. So my work now, I focus on number one, I build simulations for systems. So we have built simulation for New York City TIS. We have done one for the California. We are also building a universal simulation plan that can be easily used for many planes to use, because again, they need this information to be able to know what will happen in the future. And then we also have these guidelines. I have these risk sharing plans, policy guidelines. So I think it's a way to kind of to share some risk and share some burden. And also I have this framework to explain this to people, to stakeholders, to scholars, and to the decision makers. So hopefully that can give people some thoughts. Yeah.
I think we are all fortunate in New York State to have somebody like you helping to understand these problems and hopefully provide policymakers with
Yep.
some sensible frameworks to work through them and come to some kinds of solutions. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you to our wonderful audience for coming and sharing some time with us this afternoon. I would encourage you all to come back. We will be returning on September 29th with Brian Greenhill. He is going to be talking about how scholars of international relations think about the role of the UN in our contemporary international system, especially at this time when institutions of global governance are coming under significant pressure. And we will have more to come as we go forward in the semester. So thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing folks in the future. And thank you once again, gang, and thank you to Renee and Rockefeller College staff who worked so hard to make this series a success.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, everybody.